Yo, what's going on, Epic 7 fam? I'm Sue, and today I want to talk about my thoughts on the December 19th balance adjustment preview that was just shown earlier this morning over on Stove. The previous balance adjustment is considered by many, myself included, to be the greatest patch in Epic 7 history. Couple that with the fact that this balance adjustment that we're going to talk about today is roughly 3 weeks later than most of the player base expected it to be, and you can tell that it's a recipe for kind of negativity. People will naturally think that this patch is not very good because they're going to compare it to, again, the greatest patch in history, and they're already probably miffed because they were expecting this about a month or so ago at this point. So yes, from what little I've seen online, from the few people I've talked to, people think that this patch is not very good, that it's a snoozer, right? And I think that that is largely because of the fact that we are expecting the world out of this patch. Is this patch bad? No. Is this patch amazing? No. I think this patch is just good, right? There's only one or two bad things in the entire patch. Everything else I think is pretty solid in its own right, and I'll explain in due time. Let's talk about who we're going to talk about in this video. So, for heroes, we have Pirate Captain Flan, Closer Charles, Archdemon Shadow, Eligos, Chloe, Euphine, Sinful Angelica, and our artifacts are Sigurd Scythe and an offer you can't refuse. Let's waste no time and talk about the character that I think most people are going to complain about in this patch, and that is Pirate Captain Flan. Famously, as the story goes, a couple months back, Pirate Captain Flan was going to receive a number of proposed changes. Some posters on Stove complained, saying that it made the character awful, terrible, unusable, and this sentiment was echoed by other countries and other regions around the world, so Smilegate decided to scrap those changes. Fast forward a couple of days, and a number of top players were kind of thinking about it, and it came to the conclusion that had Flan's changes actually gone through, she would have been the most busted character probably in the game, Death Dealer Ray 2.0, if you will. And I don't know about you, but I am super tired of playing against broken Moonlight 5-star heroes. I don't need another one, please and thank you. That said, these proposed changes that we're going to talk about, if they were anything less than making Flan the best character in the game, some people will complain because they still feel entitled to getting that first set of changes that would have made her the best character in the entire game. So please just keep that in mind, right? Just be rational here. Balance is difficult. And again, I think the vast majority of my audience could agree, we don't really need more broken characters in Epic 7. So let's talk about what the character got. So execution now goes to 100% chance to steal one buff, up from 75%. Great quality of life change. Also, she no longer has 30% damage share. She just straight up has 30% damage reduction, which is obviously better because your team overall takes less damage. On top of that, rather than when Pirate Captain Flan uses her S1, if the target has a buff, right, or I should say the caster has a buff, she would get the cool, CR push with Hunt, right? She kind of shoots her gun in the air, pushes the whole team up. Now, after any ally attacks with any attack, whether it's single target or AoE, if the target does not have a buff, she gets to activate Hunt, and it gives the CR push to the entire team. So this effectively makes Pirate Captain Flan a bridge. So she no longer has to be like kind of a slow bruiser control unit or just like an opener versus slow teams. You can literally have her be a bridge. Essentially have your first character go, like Zio, for example. You press S3, silence somebody. Oh, they don't have a buff, right? I CR push the back. Cool. Flan CR pushes everybody forward. And then you can kind of, fire off the cannons or just stun a particular target. That seems really good and usable to me. That gives her a use case that she didn't have. Because before, she was kind of this bridge that would work for other characters, right? Like she had to get a turn to bring everyone else up. Now somebody much faster than her can go and push her up along with the rest of the team, and then she can push the enemy team back, and then you can hopefully snowball that into a victory. Right now, on ladder, I've had a decent chunk of success with Pirate Captain Flan, and there are a number of people in my Discord who are in top 500 Emperor right now that are playing Pirate Captain Flan in the 4th, 5th pick slot in the current format, and it's worked out surprisingly well for them. The character is better than most people give her credit. Is she broken? No. Is she meta? Not really. She's niche. But with these changes, I think you can expect a overall higher quality character, one that has more use cases, at least for Emperor rating and down. Do I think this is going to make her like top tier legend viable? Are we going to see her at E7 WC 2025? Probably not, but this certainly puts her in line with a number of other reasonably balanced units, and I think the community has kind of lost sight of things. Everybody is expecting everything to be broken. You don't need everything to be broken. You just need things to be at least reasonably viable at a high level. And I think that these changes to Flan are that. Next up, let's move on to Closer Charles, who I think is the only real dud in the entire patch. Closer Charles' biggest problem is not his kit, it is his stat line, right? He is, I believe, Scorpio Thief, my least favorite stat line pretty much ever. So he's made of paper, and he is not fast enough to do his job, which is of an opener, right? The only thing that you're going to get with this character, the only thing that's ever going to make him good is to give him speed. What they really need to do, they could have saved some space in this patch, just given him a speed exclusive equipment, right, from Hall of Trials, and give no effect. That alone will make Closer Charles meta and good, which is what I think they really want to do. They've been kind of tossing and turning with a Closer Charles buff for 13 months now, and this is what we got, and I don't particularly think it's very good. His S1 does more damage, the enhanced S1 I should say, not the basic one. Does more damage and has built-in lifesteal. Cool. Doesn't change the fact that his defense is made of paper. His closer passive procs at 40% or less health as opposed to 30%. Nice quality of life change, but doesn't really up his use cases. At the start of the first battle, he also gets an evasion buff for 1 turn. Now, if you're playing against somebody whose only actual fast unit is like Zeo, then they have a 50-50 chance of just losing the game on the spot, right? Because if they don't push back the Closer Charles, then you get to execute the cleave or the aggro strat, and they probably lose from that point. But every other opener, Briarwitch Cesaria is faster, has hit chance, will just blow up Closer Charles off rip, right? You'll still just get blown up. Same thing with like Hellion Lua, is a faster character, will just blow you up. New Moon Luna is just faster, will seal you. Maybe you might be able to get your cleave off, but you're not going to have the closer passive to kind of have the cycling, right? There are just so many other openers that do it better than Closer Charles simpler. Like, he has to go through too many hoops, and it is largely because of the fact that his base speed is like 113, 114, like in that range. Until he gets some kind of oppressive passive or speed, he's not going to be able to do this job. He's got the same issue that Judge Kisei has, right? We are 6 years into the game. It's pretty obvious. If you want the character to do something fast and aggressive, make them fast. Don't put them in the middling speed bracket, right? Otherwise, rework the damn character. I'm begging you guys over there in the design team. Anyways, let's move on to Archdemon Shadow, which is my least favorite set of changes in this entire patch. So Archdemon Shadow is a character that is very frustrating and very annoying to play against, but the biggest drawbacks that she has are, one, she's reasonably squishy, at least compared to some of the other monstrously tanky characters of today, and she's also inconsistent, or at least was inconsistent, because now she has a 100% chance to seal you on her S1 as opposed to 75%, so anytime you attack her, you're really rolling the dice, because if she actually procs counter set, you're getting sealed unless you're a high ER character. Still has the soul burn, ignore ER. And burst used to be 40% chance to proc, and then 80% if you have burst. Now it's 0% chance to proc normally, but 100% chance to proc if the target is sealed. So imagine every time now that you attack ADS, you get counter, sealed, bursted. And now burst also has splash damage built into it instead of having blind, which means that you don't necessarily need Fairy Tale for a nightmare anymore, right? So that's super good. You don't need a limited artifact like somebody like Pirate Captain Flan. Like, Pirate Captain Flan still needs a limited artifact in order to be viable. Now you can just play Book or Yellow Violin and be fine, because her consistency issues are now gone. Her damage issue is now basically gone, because you always get the pop damage. And if you want to stay with Fairy Tale for a nightmare, you can, because now you get double pop damage on burst, which is super, super good. So overall, the consistency of damage of the character is up. Dissolution giving 10% extra defense break chance doesn't really matter. Like, sure, it's great, but the main kicker here is that Touch of Chaos is 100% chance to seal off rip now, which is always going to be followed up by a burst. That is going to be so frustrating to play against. The only saving grace, right, is that the character is still not the tankiest thing in the world, but I'm super not looking forward to this character coming back, right? This character's just like such a headache. Like, if you've been playing Epic 7 long enough where you can remember a time where people would just have Archdemon Shadow on Guild War defenses, and you would just, anything you do would just be like, hoo, ha, and you just take a ton of damage. Oh man. Like, I'm not looking forward to going back to those days, especially now that it's going to happen literally every single time. Next up, let's move on to Eligos, right? Eligos, my boy, probably the coolest character in episode 5, for those of you guys who paid attention to the story. And honestly, I think Eligos' changes are better than they read. I could fully see Eligos becoming a mainstay in like single target cleave compositions with these changes. So first up, he no longer gets or requires, I should say, perception for his guaranteed dual attack. Instead, he needs greater attack buff in order for his S1 to actually get the guaranteed dual attack. And you get that now off of the cleaner. Before, when you'd activate cleaner, you would get perception, you get greater attack buff now. So how do you get the cleaner, in case you guys forget the time bomb here? It's whenever somebody other than Eligos defeats an ally, he throws kind of like his like briefcase, it explodes, and now instead of targeting the person with the highest attack, it targets the enemy with the lowest amount of health, right? And they up the damage overall, so it is more likely that when he throws the briefcase, then you are going to get an actual kill. On top of that, he has built-in hit chance and critical hit damage by 50%. Super good. So in case you're not keeping score at home, this is a character that is very fast, like in the 120s, that has 1300 base attack, and instead of giving him 50% crit, you change that to 50% hit chance, 50% crit damage, and a greater attack bump. That's a lot of free stats that you just gave somebody. Like, a lot of free stats. On top of that here, his S3 cloak and trigger, it now has resource reduction, right? That's super good because he has the hit chance, obviously, and then the resource reduction, so you could use it against Afternoon Soak Flan, reduce the focus stacks on her. He has a pretty good chance to actually hit her. And it still has the 2-turn target and 2-turn defense break, along with a 50% CR pushback, and now a 50% CR push up for Eligos. So Eligos takes turn 1, and he's hard to interact with because the exclusive equipment here, exclusive equipment number 2, it's now a 2-turn stealth. So certain characters, like say a Conqueror Elias, if somebody actually decides to play it, cannot actually get to him. It's harder to get to him now with that exclusive equipment. He gets to go first, press S3, death break and target somebody, push them really far back. They're set up for your second character to go, say maybe a Sid, for example. That person picks up a kill. That triggers time bomb, boom, throw the suitcase, tons of damage, gives him greater attack bow, and he's in position to do a massive amount of damage, right? Because he's 50% up the CR bar, he's lightning fast, and he's loaded with that greater attack bow. So I do think that this is a character that if you play very aggressively, you should experiment with, because again, I think he's a lot better than he actually reads. Like, I could definitely see entire cleaves built around Eligos for once. Like, this is a character that, since he came out, I thought was really cool looking, and I really wanted him to be good. And for the longest time, people have always said, why put your gear on Eligos when you could put it on Ran or Para? Well, Ran is not particularly very good right now, in my opinion, in the metagame, and Para is just alright. With these changes and the way that the meta currently is, Eligos looks like he is somebody to be in a prime position for you to put your absolute best speed gear on and kind of just run the opponent over with some kind of new style of cleave. At least, as somebody who's not a cleaver, that's how I see it. If you're a cleaver and you kind of agree or disagree, please let me know your thoughts down below. Would love to know that, because again, from what I'm seeing, it looks like he could be very, very powerful. Next up, we come to Chloe. Chloe's changes, in a nutshell, don't really do anything for her other than help new players in Wyvern 13, or for veterans, makes the one-shot for Banshee 13 a bit easier. In case you don't know, the 23-second Banshee 13 team with 0 RNG is built around Straze, Green Pavel, and Chloe. Basically, those characters are rage set characters, and because Chloe has Magic Nail, which ignores effect resistance, it cannot be 15%. That is how you enable the bonus damage for Straze on his rage set, which allows him to just one-shot the Banshee. So these changes just make the gearing threshold for that team, you know, super, super accessible. If you can make a rage set Straze with reasonably good stats, with the changes to Chloe here, the rest of the damage for Pavel and Chloe is brought down just that much more because, again, the attack buff, Chloe has pretty decent attack and pretty decent speed. Giving her bonus damage before Magic Nail is obviously going to make it so that your damage is overall more consistent. The margins needed to get the one-shot to work are just going to be that much smaller. Other than that, there's not really anything in here that I think would make her actually PvP viable. All of these exclusive equipments, they're all based around Heavy Strike or Hyper Strike. Hyper Strike has insane damage, but as long as this character is made of paper and has no survivability, she will never use those kinds of things. So just choose whichever exclusive equipment you want and just know that they all work just fine for the Banshee 13 one-shot. Next up, we come to Euphine, who, like Melissa, is probably the most buffed character in Epic 7 history. And these changes, I think, are pretty good. So now, Dragon's Roar here is still got the ability to dispel one buff and still has the 85% silence, right? But instead of giving attack and defense buff to the caster, you now have a AoE defense break, which is very powerful. Defense break is probably the best debuff in PvP currently. It just dictates a number of games, especially if you are a very aggressive player. Defense break is paramount for you in order to run your opponent over and win those games. Now, the S3 change should look familiar to some of you, especially if you're somebody who likes to play aggro or cleave. Dragon Charge here says after increasing the attack of the caster for 2 turns, so she gets an attack buff before she uses the attack. And it says when the enemy is defeated, grants an extra turn to Euphine. When the target has a debuff, damage dealt increases. And as long as the S3 is available, when somebody uses a skill, if a debuff is on the enemy after you use that skill, Euphine gets 20% combat readiness push. Look familiar? This is just Jacko Valentine. They basically just took Euphine and said, screw it, she's just Jacko now. So if you are somebody who didn't play during the Guilty Gear Strive collab, and you've always wanted Jacko to go alongside of your Zeo, here you go. Euphine is that character. And now, if you're somebody that heavily relies on Jacko for your cleave, you have a second copy of her, which makes it very difficult for your opponent to ban it out. It's as simple as that. I expect Euphine to see play in cleave or aggro because, again, she is functionally almost exactly the same as Jacko. Her damage might actually be even higher than Jacko. Also, her imprint concentration is changed to critical hit chance, which makes gearing her significantly easier. Overall, great set of changes in my opinion for the character. If their goal was to make this character PvP viable because she's a fan favorite and they want her to be somewhere in the metagame at some point, again, this is an excellent set of changes in my opinion. Next up, we have Sinful Angelica. Sinful Angelica, I don't think with these changes that we're going to talk about here changes any of her use cases. Still one of the best Ancient Inheritance characters, still one of the best Abyss characters, still the best or one of the best Hunt characters overall, with some niche PvP uses in things like Guild War, or sometimes as a last pick, counter pick in World Arena. None of those really change, in my opinion, with these set of changes that are proposed here. Having a 75% chance to defense break for 1 turn on the S1 as opposed to attack down is super, super good. It should probably make things a bit easier for certain hunts, specifically like Katie's, for example. That is very, very good. Soul Harvest not needing immortality to block revives means that those of you who do not have Briar Witch Assaria, this immediately becomes an amazing like 4th, 5th pick in World Arena where you don't have to worry about Angelica actually getting a turn in order to get immortality. You don't have to worry about it getting stripped by like Soulburn, Ignore ER. Just as long as she stays on the board, enemies cannot revive, and that might be long enough for you to actually survive. Doesn't have Guiding Light like Briar Witch, so she could get picked off, but still better quality of life change. And then obviously Dark Salvation, so dispelling 1 debuff, it's now 2 debuffs. Again, none of these things change the use cases on the character. They just make her overall a better character. As you can see here in the notes, she will be adjusted to be more user-friendly. That is pretty much exactly what it is. It's just a bunch of quality of life changes, especially this defense break makes things so much easier for PvE content for newer players. Finally, to round out the video, we come to the 2 artifacts in Sigurd Scythe and an offer you can't refuse. Sigurd Scythe, in my opinion, might be the best overall thing in the patch. It's the most surefire slam dunk thing, the thing that most people will feel the effects of. So Sigurd Scythe previously gave you 25% attack when you were low on health, and also up to 50% lifesteal when you were low on health. You still have the up to 50% lifesteal when you're low on health, but now you get up to 20% attack all the time. So the attack bonus is reduced, but you get it no matter what. This can be considered a nerf to characters like Lone Crested Bologna and Martial Artist Ken in their best case scenarios, but it does make the artifact more broadly usable, and it might actually be just better overall even for those characters like Lone Crested Bologna and Martial Artist Ken, because you won't have the extremely low lows or the extremely high highs, but you will get consistent performance for the character throughout the entire match, and I think that's really, really good, right? This feels like it was obviously made with Bystander Hua-Young in mind, because this change is occurring as Bystander Hua-Young is released, and Sigurd Scythe was already an artifact I thought was going to be amazing on the character. Now that you always get the bonus damage, this is probably going to be the go-to for that character. So overall, I think most players will feel the effects of this artifact change the most in the patch, and it is a very good change in my opinion. And to round out the video here, we have an offer you can't refuse. So previously, it said when defeating an enemy with a single target attack, increase the combat readiness of the ally with the highest combat readiness except the caster for up to 20% based on artifact level. Now it says, after attacking with a single attack, when the target receives damage equivalent to 50% or more of their max health, has up to a 100% chance to give a 15% CR push to all allies. Combat readiness increase effect can only be activated once per turn. So this is a hard one to evaluate, because I don't necessarily think that this is the go-to. Sachets is, I think, a little bit easier to use if you want the team CR push, but this does give the defense penetration. I just don't know who would use this. Like, I think they're saying Eligos would want this, but I don't know if Eligos has enough damage, right, to actually pull this off. I think maybe the Time Bomb, the briefcase, would be able to actually proc this. Right? That would work. But other than that, I'm not so sure. If it works with the briefcase, then this proposed Eligos cleave with an offer you can't refuse seems very, very good. But if Eligos can't proc it, then I think this is just another artifact that sits on the sidelines waiting for its perfect user. But at least this change, right? I can foresee a hard-hitting single target ranger coming out at some point that would want this, right? As opposed to the previous an offer you can't refuse, where I just could not see any reason why anybody would play this over like Guiding Light or Sachets when it first came out, before Eligos had the exclusive equipment. So overall, I do think this is a good set of changes to an offer you can't refuse, but I'm not quite sure of its long-lasting impacts, its overall impacts. Like I said, my best guess is that Eligos cleave, kind of Eligos aggro team that I hypothesized earlier in the video. And again, if you are somebody who plays aggressively or you are a cleaver, please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And for the rest of you, let me know your thoughts on the balance patch in general. Would love to hear anything from you guys, what you're thinking, what your thoughts are. Do you think it's bad? Do you think it's good? Do you agree with me that it's, like, you know, better than most people are giving it credit? Again, would love to hear from you as always. And speaking of as always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll catch you in the next one. Later now.